Men of Reddit. When was the last time you've cried and why? My friend and gym partner unalived himself on November 5th, and I didn't know for a whole week. I was texting him daily things like, "Hey man, where you at? Are we lifting today? Did I do something wrong? Why aren't you replying? Hey man, if you don't respond to this message, I'm calling the police for a welfare check." And then a friend found the GoFundMe on Facebook. I cried so hard and loud that I heard my roommate approach my door to knock. He heard me through the door and did a quick about face to retreat back to his room. Today, someone approached me in the gym saying, "Hey man, you know what happened to Ryan? He was in my class and just stopped showing up one day last semester." And I went full deer in the headlights before straightforwardly answering he unalived himself, and then returning to my workout to avoid the emotions and awkwardness. I started drinking at 8 a.m. today, so I got that going for me. OP, man, this is a rough one to start out with, huh? It's a super brutal thing, and if something like this happens, you're absolutely allowed to grieve. Don't have to feel ashamed about it or anything. I would, however, caution about the drinking at 8 a.m., but you have to do what you have to do in some cases. Just don't make it a habit, I guess. Story 2. Was tucking in my 7-year-old daughter a couple months ago. She told me that she was worried about me dying before her. I'm only 42 and healthy, so I had a conversation about how old I am likely to live and that she'll be an adult when I die. Then she said, "But when you do die, will you help me? Because I need you so much." And I lost it. Story 3. About 5 minutes ago. One of my nephews is currently in surgery for something his doctors have never seen in a kid his age before. I just got news from my sister that best case scenario has happened and they were able to take care of things. He should be out of the OR in half the time as was expected. So yeah, crying in relief at my desk at work. Going up to see him in a couple of days. It's hard to explain what it means to have kids like him in your life. Story 4. This last weekend. After a night of drinks, a very good friend of mine and I were ending the night at her apartment. We had been chatting for a bit when at one point she redirected the conversation and began to beam about how she's proud of the man I've become. She talked about my character, how I treat people, my habits. She told me there are things I do that she admires, things that I've been doing for years and that I thought no one noticed. It was a very tender moment and I couldn't help tearing up. I've never had a friend or loved one other than a relative say such beautiful things about me. Bless her soul. I don't know what I would do without her. To say that she's an amazing person wouldn't be enough. You know how they say when a man receives a compliment, they remember it forever? Well, first of all, yeah, so true. Second of all, receiving something like this can just emotionally dismantle a man in the best ways. And from what it sounds like, there's a lot to be proud of OP for. So he deserves it. Story 5. It was over the weekend. I was reaching out to a few different friends to see what they're up to, but everyone else had pre-existing plans. It hit me pretty hard when I realized that I'm always making an effort to reach out, but I don't get the same in return. I do a lot of the work, and when I try to make plans, there's always something that comes up or they're too busy. Story 6. My marriage was on the verge of collapse when my ex-wife got a job offer in another state. She had been unemployed for some time, so she had to take the job. We decided I should stay behind since I had a steady job and divorce was inevitable. My wife moved out and the kids stayed with me until she got a home in her new city. Taking my kids to the airport and putting them on the plane to move away from me was soul-crushing. I held it together until they boarded. Once they got on the plane, I lost it. My kids only lasted a few months with mom before packing up and moving back to live with me. Story 7. Last year I had to carry 2 of my bull mastiffs to the vet. They were sisters, because one had a thing on her tongue, and I figured I'll carry both in for a checkup. I left the vet without them. They both had cancer and had to be put down because it was getting worse. I was with my mother, sister, and my wife, who all came along for the ride. Everybody was stunned and in tears, and I tried to brush it off like, no big deal. Everything will be fine, and this is just for the best. When I dropped everybody home and was finally by myself in the truck, I had to pull over at the next corner just to let it all out. I cried so hard driving became impossible and must have remained parked there for like 10 minutes easily. A month after that, at my workplace, I adopted this stray dog who wandered into our site, named him Bruno. He was super playful and the cutest mutt ever. Anytime work got too stressful or my anxiety got the better of me, I would leave the office and walk out to the car park where he 100% was always there to get my mind off things. I've spent 30 minutes almost every day just sitting down and rubbing his tummy. Just the sound of my truck coming down the hills to the office, he would know it's me, and he would prepare his assault on my clean work pants with his dirty paws. The last time we spent together, I was outside giving him his usual tummy rub and love up, and I was called out to make a couple of runs in my truck. There was a bad thunderstorm that day, and I must have been gone for only 15 minutes. When returning to my office site, I saw the reddish mane of my buddy Bruno all wet and sodden just laying in the middle of the road, lifeless. I told myself it couldn't be him. There's no way. I parked my truck in the office, and a few of my employees, knowing the relationship me and this dog had, told me the bad news. They saw a car hit him. Being their employer, like the scene with the bull mastiffs, I played it cool and had them go and pick up his body for me, which we buried on site there. Like before, as soon as I was left alone, I collapsed in anguish. I've never cried so hard in my life, and this time I cried for days after as well. Anytime I would pull up to work and begin parking, the fact there was no excited mutt to navigate around just broke me up. I've lost family members, teammates, and very close friends alike. Never cried for them like I did in these two cases. I can't imagine how soul-crushing both of these instances must have been for OP. To just be taking your dogs to the vet to get something checked out just for a routine checkup and a little bit of a concern, and then to have to leave without them. And then just a freak accident of a dog that you grew a connection with getting hit by a car is... I don't really know what to say here. My heart goes out to you, OP. Story 8. I've teared up a few times, but last time I legitimately cried was in 2010 when we put my childhood dog down. I was a senior in high school and we'd had him since I was in first grade. He was my first and only childhood dog, a Siberian Husky, and I feel like we grew up in that house together. He had some cancerous tumor in his stomach that was spreading rather quickly, and the attempt at removing it didn't go so well as they couldn't get it all. We decided as a family to let him go peacefully so he didn't have to suffer, as they promised us it would continue to grow and possibly cause him severe pain in the very near future. I'll never forget holding him in my arms in that room as the vet asked me if I was ready for the moment. When she injected him, I felt his entire body sink into my arms. He was lifeless in an instant. I was so happy that he went peacefully without pain, my best friend growing up. I've never expressed my emotions from that moment to anyone besides my parents and my current girlfriend. Whenever I think back to that moment, I get teary-eyed, but I'm happy I was there for him in his final moments. I wouldn't change a thing if I could go back in time. Please try and be there for your pet if you ever have to make such a decision. Story 9. Sunday. Wife has sudden onset of insomnia and anxiety since Christmas, which has started to trigger panic attacks. She had one while I was working at work and called me. When I was free to call back, my son answered the phone. I was sobbing, listening to my 6-year-old talk her through the breathing exercises we had practiced. That kid gets ice cream for life, no questions asked. And I might go cry again. Edit. Thanks for the well wishes and health advice. Bit of an update. Wife had been taking prescription sleeping aids on our doctor's recommendation, which knocked her out for an hour or two at most. This was pre-panic attacks, so they changed to anti-anxiety/antidepressant meds for 5 days. She had another 2 panic attacks early in the week, but I had arranged some emergency leave and was there for the worst of it. On day 4 and 5, she managed to relax enough to sleep for a good 5 to 6 hours each time. Followed up with the doctor for blood samples and medical reviews, and she's dropped down to half the dosage for another week. Has slept fairly well since, and her job has been very understanding, so all being well, she's back to work for a half day tomorrow. Our son is back at school, no worse for wear, and has been spoiled rotten by all concerned. Fingers crossed it's just a flash in the pan of stress and ill health, but we have a few numbers for counseling and further testing should they be needed down the line. Story 10. July 2019. I surprised my long-distance girlfriend for her birthday after not seeing her for 3 months. Her reaction was bland, which shook me a bit, but I was like, maybe she's tired from college and work. I've gotten us a nice Airbnb for 2 nights so we can have some privacy, but nothing felt right. Last night we were listening to some music. She was sitting on the bed pressed against the wall, eyes closed. I was laying on my stomach and then Georgia by Vance Joy started playing. I teared up and covered my face with my arm. That moment I realized our relationship had peaked some time before. It was only downhill ahead. I cried without any sound and she felt the bed shaking from me sobbing, asked me what's wrong, and then I opened up about how I feel that I'm 100% into this relationship but not getting the same back. She started crying as well, confirming everything I said, and promised she'll try to improve and bring the spark back we once had. We broke up 3 months later. Oh, man, do I miss that girl. Story 11. Just over a year and a half ago when I was writing up a little letter for my just recent ex-girlfriend. We both decided to go our own ways, but I was scared how she would react. So I wrote a letter to let her know that it was just an honest handful of issues I couldn't get past, and that I would always cherish what we had. Part of the reason I was crying was knowing full well that I care too much sometimes, and am constantly taken advantage of. But there I was, selling my soul up the river to try and give her closure so she wouldn't do anything reckless. For what it's worth, OP, as someone who was recently-ish broken up with, and not with a lot of closure, I give you big props for this. That level of knowing is really important to help someone move on. And it's gonna hurt and sting for them a lot in the short term, but in the long term, it's definitely gonna be good. And it sounds like you recognize that. And it's not easy to give either, so yeah. Props to you. Story 12. Last night of the work week. I work 7 on with 7 off, accumulating 80 hours in that 7 days on. Go to bed at 8 a.m. Wife wakes me up at 4:30 p.m. to shower and be ready for family dinner at 5 with my 3 and 1-year-old daughters. As usual, wife wakes me up with my 2 daughters. They're all really excited to see me. My wife is talking with me, and the 3-year-old is playfully yelling at me about her toy, and the 1-year-old is loudly babbling. I got overwhelmed and yelled, "Stop," pretty abruptly and abrasively. Wife realized I was a grump and quietly took the kids out, leaving me to myself to finish waking up. While I work very hard not to be a jerk, I was still disconnected and overall too exhausted to invest in my family the rest of the night before I left at 6:30 for my 12-hour shift. Fast forward to work, and the last night was very much like every other night this week. A whole lot of misery and BS just swimming in acute psychosis, sprinkled with a few really sick patients and a ridiculously busy department. I love my job, I love what I do, and I love going to work. Just not this week. Coworker and fellow nurse who I was with asked me what's up because she could see something was on my mind. Now, I spend nearly the entire 80 hours working with her. She's a wonderful friend. And next to my wife and daughters, I spend a very considerable amount of my time and life with her at work. I told her how I was upset with myself for exploding at my wife and kids who were just so excited to see me because they haven't had much of me that week. I broke down and got teary and had to excuse myself to collect myself so that I could eventually get back to work, keeping my patients safe and alive. There were other small factors that led me to be irritable, such as lack of sleep and stress and the damn neighbor dog barking constantly while sleeping. But I felt like a monster. PSA. High stress / high risk jobs eventually eat up the good parts of you, and it eventually seeps into your private life. Remember to manage stress and take care of yourself so you can be replenished. To those supporting people in those jobs, remember that irritability isn't directed towards you. Sometimes we just get overwhelmed. OP, I totally get it. You work an incredibly stressful and hard job. And among all that, you still have the empathy in you to realize that what you did was hurtful and bad, kind of. That takes a lot, and it would make sense that it would tear you up inside, because you sound like a really caring person. Story 13. Just the other day. I often have these dreams where my dog Snoopy is there. However, he passed away almost 5 years ago, and in my dream I'll recognize this and say to myself, wait, Snoopy died, how is this possible? Then, somehow, I can't really explain it that well, but me wanting so bad for him to be alive again overwhelms the logical part of my mind, and I rationalize that he didn't actually die and it was a miracle. I then have a great time and am able to enjoy playing with my best friend again and having him come along on my adventures. The thing is that this really screws with me when I wake up, and I have to come to terms with the sad realization that he's gone again. Like, I enjoy being able to see him again in dreams, but it can be really emotionally overwhelming too. So some days I just wake up and cry because I miss my best friend. Hey, OP, think of it this way. He's paying you some visits. Story 14. So this is gonna sound dumb, but last Thursday, I couldn't sleep. So I was watching YouTube and a review for Avengers Endgame popped up in my feed. While watching that review, I decided to watch audience reactions to the Thor's hammer scene and the snap scene. Seeing and hearing the joy from those scenes made me lose it for some reason. I've done this kind of thing before, especially when I was younger. I would stay up thinking about what kind of dad my dad would have been and cried my eyes out knowing I would never find out. My mom would tell me that sometimes people just need to cry. Guess I just needed to cry. Story 15. A couple of days ago, my wife and I had been trying to get pregnant for 3 years now with no luck. We've been to the fertility doctor several times and had several tests ran on both of us. Done IUI, the whole 9 yards. Nothing. Doctor says there is no physical reason why we shouldn't be able to conceive. Been a long, emotional journey for both of us. A friend comes home from church work in Africa. Just got married in September to a native guy in their church. Came home to see family and announced her pregnancy. We're happy for them, but it still hurts like hell. Just couldn't hold it in anymore. Story 16. Saturday, while trying to create a Windows 10 install USB. Kinda, but not really. I'm not a crier, I'm a bottler. At most, I get a little glassy-eyed and a lump in my throat. Saturday got me. I lost my son to cancer a few years ago, just a few weeks after his 13th birthday. He was the toughest kid, super smart, way more happy and positive than a kid fighting the battles he was fighting had a right to be. He was kind to the other kids at his treatment center, always put them first, and a favorite patient of the staff too. He was just special. Every dad thinks that of their kids, but it's true in his case, he really was rare. On Saturday, my youngest decided to swap keyboards and broke something in Windows 10. I couldn't get a keyboard driver to work for the life of me on the home PC, and hours of trying to restore and repair startup functions hadn't worked either. Through a lot of frustration and misplaced anger, I decided to wipe the drive and reinstall the OS. Wiping drives makes me nervous because I can't get over the idea of losing something. A video, picture, homework assignment, all that stuff, no matter how seemingly insignificant, is all irreplaceable. After getting upset with my kid and blaming him for something that probably wasn't even his fault, setting things down a little too aggressively, pouring myself too much to drink, and hunting way too long for a suitable USB key, I finally located an unmarked one way in the back of the drawer. I put it in my laptop and it's full. Perfect. So I opened the first file to figure out if I can format it. And there he is, full screen as a first grader. The way I remember him from well before cancer was ever a nightmare, back when everything in my life was seemingly perfect. He had that kind smile on his face and a mouth full of missing teeth. That USB key was a physical backup of all the images we used at his visitation. I was simply overcome with emotion. In a heartbeat, I was confronted with how I'd mistreated my youngest, got angry over something stupid, I'm using alcohol to mask my pain too regularly, and all of the emotion that was bottled up inside just boiled over. I crumpled right there at the desk and silently sobbed so as to not alarm my family in the other room. I didn't need those missing teeth to remind me of how badly I miss my kid. I miss him every moment of the day. Time doesn't heal wounds when the lost time is the wound. Nearly 18,000 comments thus far, so mine, which is too long for most to read, will likely safely be buried here. I won't go back to correct the first line. It wasn't Saturday. It's now. Story 17. November 19th and some assorted days after. My father lost a battle with melanoma on November 12th at 78. It had gone to his liver and lungs and eventually his brain, and he rapidly went downhill. I am very fortunate that I had a father who never thought he was as good as he really was. Over the last 10 years or so, our relationship progressed in a friendship. Sadly, I lived 1,000 miles away from him, but a couple of times a week we would talk on the phone during my commute home. I got to see him 8 or 9 times after his diagnosis, and he always tried so hard to be up when I was around. At his memorial, November 19th, I met hundreds of people whom he had an effect on. I got to say a few words and shared how glad I was to have that friendship and how much I will miss it. I barely made it through my 1-minute speech. I miss that old man. Not a lot of commentary for this one. Basically, my heart goes out to everyone in these stories. Everyone was truly vulnerable with themselves here, and that's great to see. Good pushback on how much masculinity can suck in terms of dealing with emotions. Also, not many comments because I myself absolutely cried, and I'm just like, all right, next story, we gotta keep this ball rolling or I am going to collapse. Anyway, it was a heavy emotional video, so treat yourself to something you like doing. Or if you need a good cry right now, go ahead, do it. I won't judge. I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I'll see you in the next one.